we're really, really happy to be able to give you, to give Carol the opportunity to speak to all of you. Carol Stern is President and CEO of the U.S. Fund for Unicef. She's been with them for about 7 years, following a long stint, about 27 years in nonprofit and education. She was with the she was the national director of the Anti-Defamation League. She's also been in academia as Dean of Students at Polytechnic University in New York. But I think, as Carol will tell you, her most important credential is that she spends just about every waking hour in pursuit of, finding a way to sort of eradicate preventable death from disease for children. So she's going to talk to you all about that. She also is the author of this book, I Believe in Zero, and she's going to tell you about that, and we put it in some gift bags for you, so you're all getting a copy of this today, and it's an extraordinary book. We love freebies in this group. So without further ado, come on up, Carol. We'd love to hear what you have to say, because you know a lot about storytelling.
Thank you. I think
Okay, great.
Am I mic'd? Yes?
Yeah.
You can hear me? Oh, good. So has it been good so far?
Yes.
Excellent. So this is kind of fun for me because like a lifetime ago I worked for DePaul. And this building, I think, was not part of the campus at the time that I worked for DePaul, because it's the first time I'm in this building. Thought so. Okay, good. My memory has not left. So I came to the U.S. Fund as my 50th birthday present to myself. I was at the ADL. I had been there for 18 years as Abe Foxman's number 2, and he kept saying he was going to retire, but it kind of didn't happen. It's actually happening this year. And I got approached by Unicef and asked if I wanted to be their chief operating officer. And I didn't know a whole lot about UNICEF at the time, other than a few bits and pieces that I would imagine is what your knowledge base about UNICEF is. But I did know that I had spent the greater part of my career around issues that surrounded kids. And so it was enticing enough to get me to consider it. So a little bit of background about me that'll make this make a little more sense. So where am I aiming to click? That's my first question.
You don't really need to aim, just take this button.
Oh, I clicked. There we go. So I have this picture that kind of stays in my mind with absolutely everything that I do. And it is a picture of a little girl. In my picture, she's holding the hand of a little boy. The little girl is 6. The little boy is 4. And they're standing on a dock. They're getting ready to board a ship. And they're going to a country that neither of them has ever been to before, that speaks a language that neither of them speak. And it's in a place that they've never even seen on a map, because only the little girl has started school. They've only learned that they will be traveling 2 days before, and they'll be boarding the ship with neither their mother nor their father, but with a woman whose last name they know and whose first name they will never know, because they will never see her again. The year is 1939. The little girl in the picture is my mom. The little boy, her brother, my uncle. And their parents have taken everything they own to buy them passage on this ship, because they're fleeing the Nazis in Vienna. And the only way they can save their children is to put them on this ship. So my mother comes to this country because one woman cared enough to save her life, where she was raised on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in an orphanage. But I grew up in a home where you heard that story pretty regularly, that one person, somebody you may never see again, can indeed make a difference. And I know that I exist because one person cared enough to give a damn. But my grandfather also boarded a ship. It's the one down here. It's called the SS St. Louis. It's often called the Voyage of the Damned. He too sold his lumber yards, bought passage on the ship, had documents for citizenship in Cuba, and he was going to send for his kids in the States, start their life over again. When they got to Cuba, they learned that the documents they had purchased were fraudulent, and they sat in a harbor for 40 days while the world debated what to do with these people. And even the United States closed our borders, turned our backs, and sent them back to Europe, where the majority died at the hands of the Nazis. My grandfather was one of a very few who actually survived. So while my mother told me what happens when one person cares, my grandfather spent my lifetime with him telling me what happens when no one cares. So it's really not surprising that I end up doing what I do for a living. I think all of my siblings, we are all in helping professions. I don't think we really had much choice. You know, we had a mother who took us to every rally. These are the anti-war years. We went to every rally. We marched for civil rights. We were down registering voters. Whatever the cause, my mother believed if you weren't part of it, you were part of the problem, and she made sure that we got that. And thus I ended up first as a student affairs person and ultimately at the Anti-Defamation League, teaching about differences and fighting bias. And then Unicef came calling. So when Unicef came calling, all I knew about Unicef was trick or treat for Unicef. How many of you have ever trick or treated for Unicef? So statistically, you're a big group because 1 in 10 Americans has actually trick or treated for Unicef. And if you ask them, what is UNICEF? They will tell you kids. They will tell you UN. That's about Africa. Africa will come up usually, but that's about it. And so I came to UNICEF because I was told I would be able to save lives, and I thought that what greater calling is there. And 3 weeks after a year of wooing me, and I took the job, my CEO came to me. I came as number 2, and he said, "You're going to hate me, but Bill Gates just offered me a job, and I'm leaving." And I found myself as the acting president of an organization at a time in my life when the last time I had slept in a tent was when I was a Girl Scout, when my accustomed to traveling was a 4 or 5-star hotel and a comfortable seat, and where eating was a great important fact in my life. And suddenly I was responsible for the organization, responsible for saving more lives of children than any other, and working exclusively in the developing world. And the first thing I said to my board as I was campaigning for the job to be the CEO was, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can tell you that the world has no idea what you're doing, and we need to change that. And I put forth a pretty radical change to the organization that I really was sure would cost me getting the job. Instead, it made a huge success out of my career, which has been fabulous. It introduced me to Carol Cohen at Edelman. It landed some of our work in her book, and it's been a really interesting ride, and that's really what I'm here to talk to you a little bit about. So the first thing I said to the organization was, we're going to change the structure. It was a pyramid. And I have been teaching in leadership programs. I teach leadership in teams. I said, we're going to take apart this pyramid. It had had 1 guy at the top, and guy meaning male, and 2 men who worked for him, and everyone else reported up to the 3 men. So the first thing I did was to create a 6-member management team, took out my desk, did all the traditional stuff, put in the conference table, seated the chairs around it, and I hired a consultant to turn us into a team. So that was lesson number 1, was you can't just declare a team, you have to learn how to be a team. I handpicked the 6. The consultant worked with us for a year. He trained each of us individually. He was our coach, and he literally sat in meetings with us and called us on our crap. If you weren't thinking as a team member, if you couldn't take your fiefdom's hat off and think in the best interest of the organization as opposed to your own job, you were actually, we laugh, but I have this rocking chair in my office with a stuffed dead horse. If you were beating a dead horse, you sat in the horse chair. So, it's still there today. Come and visit anytime. So, we spent a year and we learned how to be a team. And at the conclusion of that, we wrote a pretty audacious strategic plan to double the income of the organization in 5 years. It was brilliant. It was marvelous. We were excited. We were jazzed. We had rah-rah going in. About a week later, the economy tanked. We weren't nearly as excited. But I will tell you, and then I'll kind of backtrack into how we did it. We met the objective. We doubled the income during the worst recession of my lifetime. We went from a $250 million organization to a $500 million organization during a period which a majority of nonprofits saw their income go down and many closed their doors. And I attribute it to 3 things. 1, a board that believed in me. 2, the best professional team I have ever had the privilege to work with. I have a team. I hope you all get to work with people like that someday, because they are fun, they are creative, They are boundless in their energy, they're brilliant, they're passionate, and they are as excited about what we're doing as I am. And together, I think we put together this 1/6 brain theory that collectively we would form this one brain, and I think it has really helped us to get where we're going. But the third reason was we decided to stop talking about statistics and start telling stories. That we were going to take UNICEF and tell you about a child, not all children. We were going to tell you about a personal experience, not a broad experience. And we were going to try to capture the hearts and minds of people because we all know children and we can relate to one, we can't relate to all. So I went in search of some stories to tell. And my first stop was in Mozambique in 2007. This was my first trip to Africa. I have to say, before I went, I packed enough food to last a year. I pretty much had every medication known to mankind in my bag. And I got there, and the first night stayed in this beautiful hotel, felt like an idiot. But after that, I traveled through the country in a Jeep with a mobile medical unit. I am not a medical professional, but my job was to do malnutrition checks, which means I weigh babies. You basically have this thing that looks like a fruit scale, except you're hanging it from a tree, and instead of a pan at the bottom where you put the fruit, it's a pair of shorts, and you kind of drop the kid in. Babies don't love it very much, but it is actually a lot of fun. So you can see I've got one of my kids there crying but hanging. Anyway, so, and you measure them once a month. And what happens in the mobile medical unit is you drive and you drive and you drive, you're off-road, your driver doesn't speak English, you're praying most of the time, and you get to some tree that he recognizes, and he turns left. And there in the field could be about 100 people waiting to see the doctor, who is coming once a month. There is one doctor for every 75,000 people in the country of Mozambique. And I was struck by that because I remember when my children were young, I have 3 sons, I have 2 grandchildren at this point, but when they were babies, if I couldn't see the pediatrician at 8:04 when I actually didn't have a meeting, and I was angry as hell, and these moms wait a month for the doctor to come no matter how sick that child is. And on about the 4th day, they took me to a maternity clinic. I walked in, the clinic was about half the size of this room. It was divided in 2 rooms, one room being a birthing center and one room being where you went after you gave birth. 8 beds, each with a bed net. In the clinic, 6 or 7 women under their nets. And I met this woman, Rosa. And I walked in and I asked her what I thought was a pretty innocuous mom question, mom to mom. I said, "Is this your first child?" You may or may not be able to tell, but there's a little baby next to her here. She had given birth about an hour before. So I asked her, "Is this your first child?" And she answered so matter-of-factly that at first I didn't think I'd heard her correctly. She said, "Well, it's the first one that lived." And this was my introduction to what UNICEF was really about. For me, I remember when I gave birth to my first child, I was the first one in my generation to get pregnant. My mom ran out and bought me a little Gucci suitcase. I packed it the day I got that suitcase. I bought this very ethereal nightgown that I truly believed I would wear for the occasion. I had in it a stack of note cards. This is pre-cell phone, so I had a stack of like note cards with every phone number rubber banded up that we would call, the bottle of champagne, the book I would read, the whole bit. I did experience a medical problem giving birth, but I was very lucky to be in a Long Island hospital, and as a result got all the medical care I needed. My child and I survived. I have a wonderful grandchild from that child, and life went on. Rosa was working in a rice paddy when she went into labor. It was 106 degrees that day. She put down her bowl and she started to walk to the clinic. And she walked alone. When I gave birth, my parents, my in-laws, my brother, my sister-in-law, everybody was there. Rosa walked alone. No one else could afford to put down that bowl. She walked for 4 hours in 106 degree heat in labor to a birthing clinic. She waited on a lawn. When she was really ready to deliver, she was brought into this half of the clinic for birthing. It's a semi-sterile environment. with a group of medical professionals with a 6th grade education. They could read, they could write. If Rosa's baby had been breech, they wouldn't know what to do. If she needed a C-section, as I did, it was out of the question. There was no ambulance outside to take Rosa to a hospital. There was no road outside, and there was no hospital with any driving distance to where she was. So, had Rosa had a problem, mom and child would die, and that was just the way it was. And I sat in that hospital room, and I looked at her, and I thought, how could I live to be 50 years old and not realize that this is what the majority of women in this world face? More women give birth in the manner that Rosa did than give birth in the manner that I did. I learned that Rosa knew the clinic because she was HIV positive. She had lost 2 children already to complications with HIV. And so she had been coming to this clinic for ARV drugs, making that walk while pregnant. And now that her baby was born, that baby would need ARV drugs for the next 3 weeks. 3 different medications calibrated based on the baby's size. Rosa cannot read, she cannot write, she does not own a scale, she cannot be given that medication to take home, and she cannot stay at the clinic because culturally that would be so unacceptable. So for the next 3 weeks, until the baby hits the point where the medication levels, she will make that walk 4 hours each way, the day after giving birth, the next day and the next day, with a baby on her back, because otherwise her child will not survive. And of course she would. We would all do that for our child. But it was unfathomable to me as I thought about my 6 days in my Long Island hospital, coming home in time for a bris, lots of relatives and gifts. And I began to understand that I wasn't in Kansas anymore, Dorothy, and that I really needed to start to tell that story. And I learned at that point that 26,000 children in 2007, 26,000 children were dying every single day, all under the age of 5, and all from causes we already knew how to prevent, but just weren't. So not the disease we didn't have a cure for, or the earthquake we can't predict, all from things we could stop, but we just weren't doing the job. And I was horrified. And then I learned that in the 1980s, that number was over 35,000. So that we had halved the number by today. Today it's 18,000. And in those ensuing years, the world's population had tripled. So theoretically, if we had done nothing, over 100,000 children under the age of 5 would die every single day. 105,000 moms would kiss a child goodnight last night and not good morning this morning. And that was horrifying to me. And we started a campaign called I Believe in Zero, that the only acceptable number was 0. 18,000 kids dying every day, and we need to bring that number down to 0. Thus, the name of the book, I Believe in Zero. Don't wait for the movie, please do buy the book. And I want Meryl Streep to play me if there's a movie I'm starting this movie. So, I have since visited 30 countries. I've had the privilege to work after an earthquake, to pitch my tent, to go in after the tsunami, to deal with a famine, to do so many amazing things that the past 8 years have been really the highlighted 8 years of my life. They've been phenomenal. I feel very, very lucky to be part of the U.S. Fund for Unicef. But this became very real for me. And it became real for me because of a partnership that we have with Pampers, where for every pack of Pampers you were buying, they were donating a tetanus vaccine. Tetanus, this disease that all I knew about when I took this job was step on a nail, get a tetanus shot. Sending your kid to college, make sure he's got a tetanus shot. That was it. I then learned how many children were dying of this completely preventable disease. And Pampers stepped up to the charge with us. And since 2006, they have been our partner on this. And basically there are 100 countries that still have had tetanus in 2006. Since the campaign began, Pampers has helped us to raise $50 million to help confront this. And right now, Kiwanis is working with us for the last $110 million to literally eliminate the disease of tetanus. But I went to Sierra Leone, And I got a chance to see what tetanus looked like. They told me when I got there, I was actually traveling with Selma Hayek, who was the spokesperson on the campaign. And Selma and I landed, and they took us to the hospital because a baby had just been diagnosed and we'd never seen the disease. We got to this hospital, Selma asked for a ladies' room, they laughed. There was no running water in the hospital, so there was no latrine of any kind. The children sleep on mats on the floor. There are no nurses. The moms stay at the hospital. If they have other kids, the other kids are there with them as well. They cook meals for their children on a fire outside the hospital. I mean, it's an entirely different world. And there in the corner was an 18-year-old mom, Menyamata, and her little child, who didn't have a name yet, but was afterwards named Fatima, because you don't name a child in Sierra Leone until the 8th day of life. The baby was 6 days old. Mom had given birth at home, which is the custom, and she reached for whatever was sharp to cut the umbilical cord, and unknowingly infected the baby with tetanus. Completely preventable. If you immunize a woman during her childbearing years, she will pass that immunology on to her baby. So even if she does do this, the baby is saved and protected. But it means we have to immunize every woman of childbearing age. Not an easy task. The baby was suffering horribly. Tetanus makes a baby supersensory. The baby couldn't turn on a light, it would hurt the baby's eyes. You can't touch the baby, it would hurt the baby. You can't sing to the baby. Any of the kind of natural instinctive mommy things you might do, you couldn't do. And so I sat down next to this weeping mom who spoke no English. I spoke none of her language. And all we could do was hold hands in the dark and stare at her child. And as I sat there, I watched the color drain out of that baby's hand, and I knew her child had died. And I also knew that she didn't know. And I know intellectually we don't get to pick where we're born. And surely if we did, none of us would pick poverty. But in that moment, the anger that I felt was so horrific to know that 70 cents is what the vaccine cost that would have saved that child from getting the disease, and $3.40 was the medication that would have cured it, and neither existed in the place that I was, and both were within a hand's reach if I were in New York at home. And I came back and I said, I believe in zero is real, because if you have to stare into the eyes of a mom who just lost a child, you understand that one child who dies of something we could prevent is one child too many. And I came back and I said, this is the story we're going to tell. And we are going to make people understand that could have been their child. That there, but for the grace of God, go I. And so that's what we've been doing. We reached the double the income number. We've just written a new strategic plan. We will go for $1 billion in our next plan. We're going to go from $500 million to $1 billion. And I will tell you that we will continue to tell stories, because it is what propels people to be part of what we're doing. There are 3 things I've learned. I've visited over 30 countries now. I spend about 1/3 of my time on the ground in country. And the 3 things I've learned that are the same everywhere I go. The first is that wherever there are children, they're playing with a ball. I don't know why. I think it's innate in us. When I retire, this is the research I'm doing. Because even when there isn't something made of rubber or leather, there are rags tied together with a string, and there is a kid kicking it and a kid kicking it back. It's like we just have to do that. The second thing I've seen that's the same in every single country is that my lap is not my property. If I sit on the ground long enough anywhere in the world, a child will sit on you. And they will never ask. They don't usually speak your language. They just say, okay, and they plop themselves down on top of you. And when they're done, and I've never quite figured out how they know when they're done, but when they're done, they will turn around and instinctively give you a hug. And probably nothing in your day will feel as good as that. And then they'll just kind of run off until the next one sits down. But the third thing I've learned in every single country that I have visited is that as parents, as sisters, grannies, aunts, uncles, friends, we all want the same things for our children. We want them to be healthy. We want them to be safe. We want them to go to bed with their bellies full. We want them to sleep under a warm blanket. We want them to dream big dreams of success. And we might define success differently. You know, for me, it's my kids going to Harvard B School. For the mom in Sierra Leone, it's owning a goat. But we both have a vision of what success is. And we want our child to have it. And we want to be part of making sure that they get it. And that's universal. That's not defined by economic success. And that we are the grown-ups. And they are children. They are not Sierra Leone's children, Haiti's children, the Philippines' children, today Syria's children, Sudan's children. They are children. And we are the grown-ups. And 18,000 of them will die today as we sit here. And that is not acceptable. So I come here today to basically tell you that I believe zero is possible. And that you, as educators especially, have access to the people who I believe will get us to that number. Because I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime. But I think you can help us. You can be part of making that happen. In the book, I wrap up the book with a story that, I won't read you the story because I will run out of time, but I will tell you a little bit about it in there. There was a famine in the Horn of Africa, and we needed to get supplies, food to children. And I couldn't get America to just ante up and give us what we needed to get the food to kids. And I could not believe in the year 2012, children were dying because they didn't have something to eat. That was just, as I sat there with my own kids saying, do we order pizza or Chinese tonight? I could not fathom that there was a mom saying, which child do I feed because I don't have enough for both. And I had a several-hour interview with a reporter from the New York Times, one of those reporters who asked far too many questions and kept me far too long, and I was itching to get out of there, and I finally got extremely annoyed, and then I just said to him, look, what mountaintop do I have to stand on, and how loud do I have to yell to get America to hear that children are starving to death? And that $1 buys enough water for 40 days, and that $5 buys enough food for X days, and where do I stand and yell? So after 2 hours of questions, he wrote his article. I got one quote, it was that. And the next day, I got a phone call. My secretary walks in and she said, Buckingham Palace is on the phone. I assumed it was my friend Mark. And for about the first 10 minutes of the call, I was convinced it was Mark, and I was horribly embarrassed when it wasn't Mark, because he's called us Bruce Springsteen in the past. But so, and that one I believed. So it was like wishful thinking here. So anyway, the palace called, and Prince William and his new bride Kate made an offer to us that they would help us draw the world's attention. They'd give me a mountaintop to yell on. They would go to our supply house in Copenhagen. They would help me pack planes full of supplies, and they would bring the entire Royal Press Corps with them. So we jumped on a plane, Cynthia McFadden from Nightline, myself, my board chair. We flew all night, got to Copenhagen. Prince William is as cute as he looks, let me tell you. And she is like drop dead gorgeous. You don't want to stand next to her for pictures. And we spent the greater part of a day packing a donated British Airways 747 with supplies and a donated UPS cargo plane with supplies. And the press corps tweeted it, social media'd it, put it on every news station. It was in every newspaper. We did indeed collect a great deal of donations as a result. Spent the whole day. We got on the plane. We flew to 5 of us with the 747. And you have no idea how big a 747 is till there were only 5 of you on it. Anyway, we flew to Kenya. We offloaded the plane. We put it onto little planes, and then we flew the little planes up to Kakuma in the north of Kenya, and we got in jeeps, and we've been up about 40 hours at this point. We get in the jeeps. We have to drive 3 hours now to where we're going to deliver this food. So we're in the Jeep, and the news crew tells me they need B-roll of the desert. This is like the last thing I really want to worry about at that moment, but we pull off. We haven't seen anybody for hours. We were driving through the desert, and we pull off, and the camera crew is shooting B-roll. And while we're standing there, I hear a noise, and I turn around, and there's a woman coming over the crest of the mountain, holding the hand of a child. I can't tell how old she is. I can't tell how old the child is. She's thin, she's gaunt. The kid is obviously stunted. The face is more mature than the body. I can't figure out where they've come from because we haven't seen a village literally for hours. I scared her, she scared me. We just stood there kind of staring at each other. Like, is it safe? she kind of, and it was apparent that if necessary, she would definitely attack. And we just kept staring at each other. And I foolishly said hello, which she clearly spoke no English. And after a moment, she just kind of melted a little, and she rubbed her belly. She put out her hand. It was clear that she was hungry. No matter how scary I might be, she was hungry. And I had an apple in my backpack from the night before on the 747, because there were a lot of apples, because there were only 5 of us. So I took the apple, and I tossed it to her. And she caught this apple, and she looked at it, and then she bowed, which was the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen for me, but something that meant so little to me. She was so grateful for it. And she kind of turned around and she just left. And I tell you that story because I think we all have apples in our backpacks. I think we all have something that may not mean a whole lot to us, but is the difference between life and death for somebody else. If you're a poet, write about it. If you're an artist, paint about it. And if you're a teacher, teach about it. Incorporate it. There are children dying every day, and everyone in this room could be part of doing something about it. Thank you very much.